capital destroys 80 houses, around 220 people displaced. And now the news in detail. In Nigeria, frontline community activists, local and international civil society groups, development experts, and government representatives will converge in Abuja tomorrow and Friday for the National Conference on Climate Change COP27 and beyond, organized by the Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, CAPA. According to a statement signed by CAPA's Director of Programs, Philip Japo, the conference, which is coming a month away from the climate conference scheduled for Egypt in November, will also draw the expertise of participants who will interrogate Nigeria's nationality-determined contributions and Nigeria's Climate Change Act 2021 and build consensus on the need for adequate climate financing for the implementation of adaptation and mitigation plans in Nigeria and Africa. It said the conference is intended to enrich the existing pool of information and resources needed to upscale inclusive climate change programming in Nigeria and the extension Africa. And by extension Africa, Japo explained that the discussions will be robust as the conference participants are drawn from the diverse spectrum that is relevant to articulating a common climate change agenda for COP27 with emphasis on just energy transition. Burkina Faso's government says at least 11 soldiers have been killed and 50 civilians missing after armed fighters attacked a 150-vehicle military escorted convoy taking supplies to a northern town. In a statement, the government explains that the assault took place in the commune of Gaskind in Zom province, where armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the ISIL group been escalating attacks and seizing territory since 2015. Officials added that 25 people, including 20 soldiers, were wounded, while dozens of trucks destroyed. Violence has raged in Burkina Faso since Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Shadago seized power in a coup in January, toppling the West African country's elected leader and promising to reign in the armed group. As in neighboring countries, fighters affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIL have stoked the unrest even after Damiba earlier this month sacked his defense minister and assumed the role himself. Lawyers to the former Guinean dictator Moussa Dadis and several co-defendants have been detained a day before their trial opens for the 2009 stadium massacre. Camara, alongside several of his associates, including Colonel Moussa Tegboro and Copland Pivi, were indicted for their roles in the 2009 Conakry Stadium massacre and are set to appear in court for trial on rights violations. The public prosecutor's office said in a statement that the suspects were detained in line with the law that requires that an accused person spends at least a day in detention prior to commencement of their trial. Camara, who led the 2008 coup, became Guinea's fourth head of state in the wake of the death of long-time leader Lansana Conté, who had led the country with iron fist for 24 years. His administration had promised to hand over power to a civilian administration, but it soon became clear that Camara wanted to stay in power by contesting the planned elections. This is the World at Noon coming to you from Ocean State Broadcasting Corporation, Voice of the West, Nigeria. Now our mid-news message. Remember to cater for the less privileged in all you do. The world-renowned climber had been descending from the 27,000 feet Manaslu mountain on skis. Montana Danny Arnold becomes first in the world to climb frozen waterfall without ropes. The world-renowned climber had been descending from the 27,000 feet Manaslu mountain on skis when she is said to have crashed near the summit. Meanwhile, Montana Hillary Nelson has been found dead after going missing while skiing at Manasu in Samagaon, Nepal. Sri Lankan police have disclosed that at least 80 houses were destroyed due to a fire that broke out in a highly populous area in Colombo, with around 220 people displaced. Reports Zinjua News report has it that the fire broke out at the Kajamawati flat in Totalanga, and it took firefighters several hours to get the blaze under control. No casualties were reported in the incident, and those affected are housed in community centers and places of worship. The police are yet to determine the cause of the fire, and the total property damage has not been estimated. Meanwhile, Pakistan has appointed a new finance minister as the country struggles with an economic crisis. Pakistan appointed a new finance minister today as the impoverished Islamic nation struggles to recover from an economic crisis worsened by deadly floods. A senior figure in the ruling Pakistan Muslim League Party, Ishaq Dar, has been finance minister 3 times, and he is credited with overcoming economic turmoil during his previous stints in the role. His challenges will be to convince the International Monetary Fund to soften some of its conditions under which Pakistan received a $6 billion bailout in 2019, and to deal with the economic devastation caused by unprecedented flooding. He was sworn in during a brief ceremony attended by President Arif Alvi and Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif. Hurricane Ian has knocked out power across Cuba and devastated some of the country's most important tobacco farms when it slammed into the highland western tip as a major hurricane. Cuba's electric union said in a statement that work was underway to gradually restore service to the country's 11 million people during the night. Reports have it that power was initially knocked out to about 1 million people in Cuba's western provinces, but later the entire grid collapsed. Ian hit a Cuba that has been struggling with an economic crisis and has faced frequent power outages in recent months. It made landfall as a Category 3 storm on the highland western end, devastating Pinar del Rio province, where much of the tobacco used for Cuba's iconic cigars is grown. Local media in Palestine has reported that 1 Palestinian was killed and 9 others injured this morning, 2 of them critical, in an ongoing Israeli army assault on Jenin refuge camp and a siege of a house. Reports have it that 1 Palestinian was shot in the head and killed, while 2 others among 9 were shot by live bullets in the chest and admitted to Jenin Hospital. A large army force also raided Jenin and its refugee camp this morning, firing in all directions and shooting tear gas canisters while surrounding and shelling a house that belongs to Fatih Hassem, father of Brad, who was killed by Israeli forces in April following an attack in Tel Aviv. And here again are the highlights of the world at noon. In Nigeria, frontline community activists, local and international civil society groups, development experts, and government representatives will converge in Abuja tomorrow and Friday for the National Conference on Climate Change COP27 and beyond, organized by the Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa (CAPA). Burkina Faso government says at least 11 soldiers have been killed and 50 civilians missed after armed fighters attacked a 150-vehicle military-escorted convoy taking supplies to a northern town. Sri Lankan police have disclosed that at least 80 houses were destroyed due to fire that broke out in a highly populous area in Colombo with around 220 people displaced. And that was the world at noon. In this news talk, Adeboye Popola calls on the federal government to shift ground from no work, no pay and reconsider the plight of the university's lecturers who have not been paid for the past 7 months before implementing the court order for reopening of the universities.
The federal government withdrawal of a circular addressed to pro-chancellors and vice-chancellors of the federal universities to reopen their respective universities following the public uproar and wide negative reactions expressed desire by the federal government to depart from its earlier hardline stance on the protracted dispute with Association of Staff Union of Universities in the country. It would be recalled that the federal government and ASU had met severally on the implementation of salient agreements which the federal government voluntarily entered with the university's academic union over a decade ago. It is highly surprising that the agreement, which is dated back to 1999, is still being implemented in phases ever since then and still the crux of the current agitation by lecturers of the universities. The lecturers and federal government had met for 7 months before the Minister of Labour, Chris Ngige, dragged ASU to industrial court for judicial adjudication on the lingering trade dispute. It is apposite to mention the intervention of stakeholders of the universities, the pro-chancellors and vice-chancellors, who held joint dialogue with the federal government representatives and ASU. The disposition of the federal government during the negotiation could be summarized as assertive, self-confidence and focused on deal and results. The aggressiveness of the federal government representatives was reflected in unyielding position of no work, no pay, postponement till next year, the implementation of 35 and 25% salaries increment for professors and other categories of lecturers, as well as the delay till next fiscal year, the release of funds for infrastructural development in the universities. The outline posture of the federal government, despite the appeal by pro-chancellors and vice-chancellors, crippled the efforts to halt the trade dispute through mediation. The pertinent question is how realistic is the settlement of industrial imbroglio at the law courts when the plaintiff is so imperialistic at negotiating stage and seemed to be rigid to shift ground for the purpose of achieving peace. Newstalk is of the view that the order of the National Industrial Court, which directed the striking lecturers to resume work without making pronouncements on their arrears of salaries, lacks justice, even if it meets all the requirements of the law. It is for this purpose that Newstalk is calling on the federal government to exercise restraint in implementing the order. Newstalk posits that the world has moved beyond the medieval era when power is wielded to subjugate the opposing views. The Renaissance world thrives in dialogues and negotiations. This makes the government policies to be collectively driven. Newstalk therefore salutes the federal government for withdrawing the circular which directed the pro-chancellors and vice-chancellors to reopen their respective universities. Newstalk posits that the circular is vindictive and will not in any way produce positive results. It is our opinion that federal government will consider the plight of lecturers in the public universities who have not been paid for the past 7 months before the implementation of court order for reopening of the universities.
That's Newstalk calling on the federal government to exercise restraint in the implementation of court order for the reopening of the universities was written by Adeboye Popola of our editorial desk. The piece was presented by Temitope Olaiwola. For more about us, you can visit www.osbcng.org. Thanks for listening. Good afternoon.